Good morning, buenos días, bon dia, bon dia. Más. Good morning, bon dia, bons dias. Let's start with the third session. Okay, it's a great pleasure for me to introduce you to two keynote speakers that you will see have some parallelism. First is Oscar Godoy. Oscar Godoy is a biologist that studied at the University of Alcalá de Henares, and he obtained his PhD degree in 2009 under the supervision of Pilar Castro and Fernando Valladares. He went after that to University of California, at the University of Santa Barbara, with Jonathan Levin. And after that, he spent 2 more years at the University of California at Irvine with Bradford Hawkins. After those 4 years, he came back to Spain, to Seville, at IRNAS, working with Lorena Gomez, and with Juan de la Cierva, and then with a Marie Curie Fellowship. Now, since 15 days ago, he has begun his Ramón y Cajal Fellowship at the Department of Biology at the University of Cádiz. His background is on community ecology and the implications for biodiversity maintenance. And although his background has been in terrestrial ecology, he's now looking forward to work at the interface between land and sea. So he will tell us many things that they are of interest to all of us. And he told me to say that his talk can be applied to any kind of environment.
Okay. So I'm going to try, okay, it works. So thank you all for coming. I had 2 very strong environmental filters. One was the dinner meeting and also the soccer match. So seeing so many people here around is a big pleasure to me. And also, I'm very happy to be here and to be with so many good ecologists, being introduced by Anna, being together sharing with Jordi, and also being invited by Paco. So to me, it's a really honor. So 13 years ago, I was a fresh PhD student, just hanging around and having the opportunity to present all my results and being so excited about it is a great opportunity. So it's my pleasure to be here. So thank you very much. And indeed, I'm here, but it's not just me. Many of the results and the ideas that I will be presenting is together in close collaboration or just random chat with a great group of students, a great group of collaborators as well, and my past advisors. So I do follow the philosophy of SIBECOL. I do think that we should start looking at the marine, freshwater, and terrestrial systems. And for that reason, I moved to Cádiz. Well, you most know where is this place. But why I moved there? Because it's a unique set where I can start working in marshes, grasslands, seagrasses, meadows, more forests, or even intertidal communities. And there I can start studying annual plants, trees, insects, algae, or phytoplankton. And my talk here is to present general rules that go all these systems. So, well, I will be biased by my terrestrial background, but please try to make the mechanism of how these ideas apply to your particular system, please. I will ask you to make this effort. And also, 1 minute of self-investment. I'm looking as a new adventure for students and postdocs, so if you like the talk, just come to me, just drop me an email, write me through Twitter. I will be very happy to discuss research opportunities. And I go there with a lab that is called MESI Lab, and the acronym is for Mediterranean Ecological Studies and Synthesis, but actually there's a story behind the name of this lab, and it's this paper. John Lawton in 1999 wrote a very thoughtful paper, very well cited, and very interesting paper and very provocative title. Are there general laws in ecology? Well, I recommend the reading, but basically he said, community ecology is a big mess. And today, today I want to challenge this idea. I want to say, sorry, Sergio Lawton, but I think you are not right. We have basic rules in ecology, basic laws, and with them, we can ask fundamental questions in ecology. And the laws are as simple as that. Species do interact, but the key thing is that species do interact not only between, individuals of a species do interact not only between a species, but also individuals interact within a species, and this is key that many studies often forget. The second law is that all relationships are asymmetric. Our relationship right now is also asymmetric. I'm speaking, you are listening. Our relationships are asymmetric with our family, with our friends, with everything, and this also happens in nature. The third law is that species do interact in direct ways, but also in indirect ways. And this is the basis of the web of interactions and what we call the networks. And these networks connect not only species within trophic levels, but also species between trophic levels. And this is what Jordi and colleagues name as the architecture of biodiversity. And with these four laws, we are going to make the whole story. We're going to try, with these basic rules, to understand how species can coexist. So we can ask the question of how biodiversity is maintained. And I'm not just referring to plants or to insects. I'm referring to everything, to how primary producers coexist with predators, and these predators coexist with other predators as well. So to go through this complexity, my talk will start really simple, and we'll go to try to tackle all this complexity. And the starting point is the classic niche theory, which posits that it was only a one axis who determined whether species can coexist or not. And it was as simple as that. If two species have the same niche, the species blue and the species white, the probability of coexistence is low. But if two species have a quite different niche, the probability of coexistence is high. Sorry, my voice is... But this poses a conundrum. What happens when two species have the same niche? Can you tell me which one will dominate? Because according to this theory, it's supposed that none of them can coexist. Is going to coexist the blue or is going to coexist the white? The answer is we don't know. Because with only one axis, we cannot determine which is the best competitor. To do so, we need another axis. That is what we call average fitness differences. So modern coexistence theory, or an update of how coexistence works, is that we have two axes. One is what we knew as niche difference, who now does not determine coexistence, only stabilize coexistence between species. And we have another axis that determines competitive imbalance between species. And the theory what says is that species can coexist where their niche differences overcome their fitness differences. So two species can coexist because they have high niche differences that overcome high fitness differences, or because they have more neutral dynamics where small niche differences overcome small fitness differences. And how do they do so? They do so because they have a demographic signature in how populations behave and their dynamics. So when the species are common, the niche difference, when the species are rare, the niche difference, what they do is that they tend to produce high offspring per individual. But as the species is getting rare, as the species is getting common, these niche differences, what they do is that they produce low offspring per individual. So we have a negative demographic signature of the niche differences. And this is the only slide that I'm going to present with the equation. I promise that. So, but this is fundamental work to me, because I develop a toolbox where I can relate these ecological concepts explicitly and rigorously to the dynamics of competing species. So I have a model that describes population dynamics. It's only that I want you to know. And with this model, I can create a definition of the niche differences that relate specifically to the population dynamics. And basically, the idea that I want you to retain is that niche differences occur when you compare the limitation within a species to the limitation between a species. Okay? So we are trying to understand the niche differentiation between a species and the implications of this niche differentiation from a demographic perspective. Many people ask, how do you measure that? Well, there are many ways, but one that is basic to try to understand these things is when you have a gradient of density, where you have individuals of a species with no interaction, so no low density, and when you have high densities. And you measure some output, reproductive output, like seed production, like egg production, and you compare that to who is in your neighborhood. When the density of yourself and your competitor is the same, you measure interspecific effects. And when it's the opposite, you measure interspecific effects. Okay, so now we have a toolbox that connects ecological properties to species dynamics. And now we can test, okay, there were literature for decades trying to understand whether traits, phylogeny, and things like that that were thought to be niche differentiation axes are really niche differentiation axes. And I'm going to present rather negative results. And this is the first one. Okay, in this paper that I did with Nathan Kraft and Jonathan Levine, what we ask is whether niche differences between species is related to the phylogeny distance. The basic question that as you evolve far apart, the niche differences between species is going to be high, but closely related species should have the same niche. And the answer for us was no. A species very distantly related and a species very closely related, they have high variation in niche differentiation. The curve bends here because we start from the zero, but actually the line is completely flat. So no role of phylogenetic distance on promoting niche differences. What happened with traits? Well, people also always like to measure SLA. They think it's great for niche differentiation. And also they like to measure other stuff like phenology or seed mass, thinking that they play a role in how species exploit the environment. And the answer for us was no. Again, no sign of niche differentiation. So most of the traits that we think they play an important role in how species compete, actually they are not axes of niche differentiation. They are only axes of fitness differentiation, of how good are the competitive imbalance between species. Only niche differentiation were detected by a combination of traits, which means that species need to be differentiated in multiple axes to try to get these niche differences that they stabilize their population dynamics. More recently, in a paper with a great team at Seville, we have detected univariate relationships of niche differences with the species traits. But we have a good and a bad news. The good news is that there are physiological traits directly related to the niche differences that are important to us. But the bad news is that they are hard to measure. So which pose a problem of use trait-based community ecology to try to understand population dynamics. And our key place is here, the leaves. Two traits, how species use the light efficiently and how species use the water efficiently, were key to us. And this is the result I want to show you. This is the degree of correlation of niche differences with many different traits across two contrasted environments, a control environment and a drought environment. And what we see is that when species have water in the soil, they can be niche differentiated to their delta 13, which is the water use efficiency. But when species are water limited, that is this case, it's not traits about water use efficiency which determine whether species can coexist or not. It's about how they use light, how is their efficiency in the use of light with different irradiance, which is determined by this trait. So we see a mismatch between the traits determining coexistence and actually the environmental filtering that the species are experiencing. Okay, I'll show you a bit the results about mechanisms of pairwise coexistence. But as you might know, and it's clear, many species interact not only in pairwise, interact in multiple combinations. And these are the two basic combinations. Species can interact in a rather transitive manner. So you have a superior competitor, you have an inferior competitor, and there are asymmetric competitive imbalance between species. Or you might have more intransitivity dynamics, where it's the classic example of rock scissors paper dynamic, where one species wins the other and there is no universal or weak competitor. So all species are good and bad at the same time, depending on who is your competitor. Okay, so this can go really complicated. You know Big Bang theory, right? And now Sheldon said, well, it's not only rock, scissors, paper dynamic. You have also you have also lizard and spoke. And we thought, okay, this is cool, but these guys were no one compared to how complex these kind of things get. So you can have 7 species getting rather complicated things. You can have 9 species. You can have 11 species. Or you can have even 15 species. And you can see how complex things can get. You want to go through them? Let's go. OK, so wolf wins lightning. Seems like it's something more like Game of Thrones or something like that. Winterfell. Lightning wins human, which is clear, right? Human wins paper. OK. Paper wins rock. This one I knew from the past. And rock wins wolf. OK, good enough. OK, so as we are getting more species and things are getting complicated, then we can ask, OK, we have the pairwise niche difference, which seems to play a role, but we have a lot of indirect effects as well. So how these two guys play together? And to try to understand this thing, what we can do is knock out the niche differences. We can say, OK, we can put things in the ground and try to erase the negative frequency that I showed you in the first slide and try to see what is the role of indirect interactions. And can you answer what will happen? Do you have any idea? OK, this is the result. None. I can say it louder. None. But I can say it clear. Without niche differences, indirect effects play no role at all. No role at all. And well, this is so. And we published that in this paper with Daniel Stouffer, great collaborator. And what we've seen is that regardless of we have transitive structures, regardless of whether we have intransitive structures or we have a combination of both, there is competitive asymmetries between species. And when we have high competitive asymmetries between species, we need strong niche differences up to 1. 1 is the maximum value. In such a way that niche differences overcome competitive imbalance between species and therefore stabilize the coexistence of species. These are, by the way, different species. Sorry, I didn't explain that. And when the competitive imbalance between species is low, and you can see that by the width of the arrow being much more smaller, you don't need so much niche differences for the system to be stabilized. Okay? So niche differences actually act as a stabilizer of the whole network. And without them, due to the competitive imbalance between species, you cannot obtain coexistence otherwise. OK, and this is not just because of a single study. With a great group of people in Seville, what we put were 10 annual plant species to compete across 2 different environments. And you can see the network interactions when we have a controlled climate and when we have an extreme climate drought. And you can see 2 important things here. The first important thing is that this network is much more transitive than this one. There are good competitors that all the arrows go from them to other species, and there are bad competitors where all the arrows goes to them. You see here, these guys win against all species, but also lose against all species. So this is much more transitive, which supposedly should maintain lower degree of coexistence. And also, another important thing is that here, the width of the arrows is much more stronger. So the good competitors are really good. But here, the width of the arrows is much more weaker, saying that more or less all competitors are the same. And despite these networks should maintain higher degree of coexistence, actually it maintains low coexistence. And the reason is, again, the importance of niche differentiation. So what I'm presenting here is niche differences against fitness differences. You might remember that from the first slide. This is the region for coexistence, and this is the region for competitive exclusion. And what you can see is that most of the niche differences, here is a much more spread. But here, all the points go here, like no niche difference at all. And as you might recall from the previous slide, without niche differences, indirect effect might not play a role on stabilizing and determining coexistence among species in multiple species assemblages. OK. OK, so with such an important role of direct pairwise interactions between species, we might start to ask, OK, how this is affected by other trophic levels. Do you remember the fourth law? The interactions between trophic levels? So how do play in the competitive interactions between plants? What is the role of insects, for instance? You can imagine what is the roles of grasshoppers or snails or other kind of interactions. And, and we are not being biased by design of the interaction. We are going to take the full complexity that in some cases, a species produce a positive effect on one another, like a classic mutualistic example, or a species might have an everybody effect. So we have positive and negative effects. And this was done with my master's student, and Nacho, a great, great collaborator. And with Jose, what we asked was, okay, we have floral visitors in an annual plant community in Doñana, and we are going to see which is the direct effect of these floral visitors on the reproduction, which is more or less determine the competitive dominance. But also, we're going to see how, sorry, we're going to see how a species of insects modulate the competitive effects between the plant species, okay? So we have direct effects and indirect effects on pairwise interactions. Okay, and I love this paper. I have to say I love this paper because for the first time, this paper went from more experimental approaches to just go to the field and see what's going on there. And when we see for the most important species that they have floral visitors, the first thing that you can see here is that there's a wide combination of who is visiting who. There are some species like this dandelion, which is mostly visited by beetles. There are other species that these are Asteraceae, and this one, in which flies, they play an important role. You have also some species that they have a bit of butterflies, beetles, flies. So you can see an important differences in the frequency of visiting, of who is visiting who. And this has implications for the population dynamics of a species, and has huge implications. You can see here the viable seed production against the number of neighbors of the plants. So that will be like, this point will be, okay, I have a focal individual of one species. I want to know the viable seed output against the number of neighbors that they have in the neighborhood. Do you remember the neighborhood? Okay, and what we see is, and we have three levels of flower visitors. We have no visiting at all, low visiting, and high visiting. And for some species, like this chamomilla, what we have is that floral visitors, two important things. When there is no competition, it increases the reproductive seed output, which is the classic mutualistic effect. But also, it is creating an apparent facilitation effect. So how the curve of competition bends is much more slower than this one. But we can also have the opposite result. We can have, for instance, beetles, that what they are doing is, as they increase the visiting, they are reducing the seed output. And the important thing is that despite having positive and negative results in both the seed reproduction and in both how species interact, we have common patterns. This figure is a bit complex, and I'm gonna explain, and I'm gonna go through it. So we have the niche difference again, the fitness differences, the region for coexistence, and the region for exclusion. And each dot is a pair of species. And what we see here is that with floral visitors, most of the species goes down to the region of coexistence. Okay? So what floral visitors are doing is increasing the likelihood of a species to coexist. And one very interesting point here is not because the classic idea that floral visitors make a species to exploit different niches, because we are not seeing any change in this axis. What we are seeing is most of the changes in this axis. So actually, what pollinators and herbivores are doing are equalizing the competitive imbalance between species. They are not making one species to exploit one niche and another species to exploit another niche. Okay? And this is very interesting because the effect of a multitrophic interaction is much more different than the effect of the environment, in this case, salinity. Salinity was what is doing is actually, well, sorry, what is doing is actually putting all the species to the region of exclusion. Salinity, what it's doing is doing that some species are very good under high salinity and some species are very good under low salinity, but it's not creating the equalizing effect that actually pollinators and floral visitors are doing for stabilizing the dynamics of the species. Okay, so we can go much more complex than that, and if you are really interested, I recommend you to go to Rodrigo Rangel talk that is at 4 at room M6, where he's going to explain a much more complex thing in which we have a network of plants with their interactions, and we have also a network of plants and herbivores, and he's going to present how the network interactions and how the topology and how the properties of the network determine the probabilities of coexistence of a species in a multi-species assemblage. So it's really good talk. I'm very proud of this project, and I highly recommend you to go. Okay, so to wrap up all these ideas and all these kind of different direct effect, indirect effect, effects within the species of the same trophic level, effect of multiple species across different trophic levels, all these ideas that I've been presenting is more or less this scheme, where we have one trophic level, let's say plants, where it has competitive interactions among themselves. And also you have another set of interactions with this one is what present with pollinators, and this one is what you may have through soil conditions or through environment. But actually, all the questions I said before, it was about the consequences of these interactions for the coexistence of a single trophic level. But we want to go much complex than that. We want to actually know how the whole system can coexist. It's not just here, it's the whole system, okay? And we published a review in Trends last year. Again, I'm very proud of this paper. It took me 2 years to publish, so it was a lot of work. Where actually we said, okay, we are getting a big knowledge of what is happening here, but we are making huge assumptions. And the one is that all these guys over here and all these guys over here are thought to be at equilibrium, let's say in technical terms, are thought to be always present. We don't care about the dynamics. And this is a big mistake, because great effort and great papers done by the people more working on network studies, on network theory, they already addressed this complexity. Work by Jordi and colleagues already thought about how to integrate all this complexity of interactions. So actually we can say, okay, we are here, and we have these guys that can complement our studies. But the important thing is that, network studies, they were thinking about more like horizontal dynamics, but they were losing a bit the focus on, they were thinking about vertical dynamics, but they were focusing the role of, a bit the role of horizontal dynamics. So actually, by combining both, by combining network theory studies and combining niche theory studies, we can address the full complexity. So we can address, okay, we want to understand how the whole system coexists, taking into account the vertical dynamics between trophic levels, these ones here, but also the horizontal dynamics within trophic levels, okay? And so you can see it's like a globe. It's like both theories can merge together because they complement, but not also because they have developed tools to be complement. Also because they have developed theoretical thoughts and ecological concepts that with very, very historical different background, they reach the same conclusions about how species can coexist. Okay, in network studies, there were, let's say the parallelism between each differences is that they were studying also how are the stabilizing dynamics of much more complicated dynamical systems. So you have, for instance, here 3 grasshoppers and 2 plants, and they were trying to understand how the system can be stable. But they were missing a key point. They find equilibrium and they find stability, and they predict, okay, these communities are stable. But they were saying that not all species in the community can coexist together. And we actually are interested in the whole community, in the whole species at the same time. So actually what we want to know is how these guys that were excluded here actually can be there. And in the same idea that for two species, we have an niche differences, and species can coexist when there is, when the fitness difference fall within this area of coexistence. Network theory, through a stability framework, structural stability framework, reached exactly the same conclusions. And that was amazing to see that. They said, okay, a species, the interactions between species create a space for coexistence. And again, they want to know whether the competitive imbalance within a species fall within. And if they fall within, then the prediction is coexistent. And if they fall outside, same as here, the prediction is exclusion. So if you have a dinner tomorrow, or you go with your friends to some place and you want to chat about, this is the key message I wanted you to remember. So you say, hey, Carlos, did you know what? You know, I'm going to tell you something I learned today. And you can say, Carlos, you know what? Species interactions create actually a coexistent domain. And biodiversity is maintained when this domain accommodates difference in fitness between species. Okay? It's like the society. If we are in war, someone will lose. If we create a network of social tissue, then we as individuals can be in the society. Okay? So please remember that. This is key for nature and for everything else. Okay. So this beautiful integration of niche and network theory allow us to go much more further than we were previously thinking. Because actually, we can start thinking about how the interactions between trophic levels, but also how the interactions within trophic levels are important for coexistence. So imagine that you have a plant pollinator system, and actually, we can start asking, what is more important for this system to be coexisting? Is the plant-plant competition? Is the animal-animal competition, which is what actually no one measures, this one? Or is actually the effect of animals on plants or the effect of plants on animals? The answer is we don't know yet. This is a black box. But the tools and the ecological concepts are merged in such a way that we can start asking these questions. And I'm presenting just two trophic levels, a bipartite network, but it can go to multi-layer network. I mean, I can put here, we can put here parasitoids of the insects, or I can put fungi of the plants, or I can put herbivores, and what will happen is that this block matrix will grow. But the idea is the same, okay? And rather than presenting you results, which will be more information, I want to use the final of my presentation just to hang around about ideas, because I think it's important to present ideas and to discuss with you guys later. So, okay, we have the tools, we have the ideas, but we want to understand how these things are actually in real world. And in real world, the community are heterogeneous through time and space. And in different conditions, on different climate, or different soil, or different nest availability for insects, for instance, we're going to have different networks, right? And these different networks are going to create, when you speak to Carlos, you will remember that, are going to create different coexistence domains. And again, when the interactions create a feasibility domain that accommodates the competitive imbalance between species, they will be able to coexist. And when that will not happen, they will create exclusion. And it's not how, again, it's not how big is this feasibility domain. It's how this is big is compared to the fitness differences. So you may have high coexistence domain, high feasibility domains that don't allow species to coexist because actually the fitness differences, the competitive imbalance between species are very high. So remember, it's not having huge area. It's always a relative measure compared to the competitive imbalances. And this is where I had an epiphany, I had to say. I was reading this guy, and I was reading Ramon Margalef, and I was like, oh my God, this guy is amazing. I mean, 60 years ago, he thought about this idea, and it's right there. And actually, the legacy of Ramon Margalef is brilliant. I was amazed. And actually, Ramon had a way to do this integration in a very nice way. To do this integration of community ecology to ecosystem ecology through thermodynamics. And this might be clear in a more marine freshwater environment, but it's not so clear in terrestrial environments. And what he said, and please let me read it. He said in his Principle in Ecological Theory in 68, so a long time ago, an ecosystem is a self-regulating adaptive cybernetic system. And this is where the great things goes. And it tends to remain in the most stable of all possible states permitted by its dynamic structure. Do you remember the dynamical that we were talking about? That species interact in a dynamical way. And what a species is going to do is create by their organization, by their self-organization, the most stable of all of these structures. Which basically what he's saying is that it's going to create the combination of the feasibility of the domain and the thinness differences that is actually the most stable. So in these three cases, the most stable will be this one, because it's the one that still have a huge differences here for all species to coexist. This is close to be stable, and this is unstable, okay? And actually, he said, the structure with the stability through time are those most stable to influence the future. So actually, he was not speaking about ecological dynamic. He was speaking about evolutionary dynamics. And he said, with the least expense of energy. So actually, it's where the thermodynamics goes in. We can start understanding the interplay between ecology and evolution through thermodynamics, including the energy required to process and store information. And information, he said, is anything that can influence and shape the future. So actually, what he was saying is the following, just to try to make these things clear. We have some kind of environmental variability that can be whatever you may think. And species and the communities, we need to focus on two things. How they transform the energy. Do you remember the traits, the traits I was explaining before, the water and light energy traits? So these are the traits that is going to convert the energy into the system. And this energy is going to create some entropy that is going to influence the structure of species interactions and the difference in thinness difference in population growth rate, which is going to create the structural stability. And actually, the systems are going to do that with the less amount of energy. So this is why we go through the entropy. And also, what he said when he was talking about information is that the information is going to feed back into this loop in such a way that changes at the species level, such as microevolution, such as phenotypic plasticity, such as epigenetics, and also changes at the community level that can be coevolution, that can be network rewiring, is going to feed back into here to create more stable dynamics, to create a self-organization system. And perhaps this is the most abstract slide, but I wanted to present it because I thought it was very interesting now that is the 100 years of Ramon Margalef's legacy to think about how to integrate community ecology into a broadest perspective of ecosystem ecology, where we understand the fluxes of energy and the fluxes of temperature and other fluxes and how they feed back together. And with this, I would like to finish. I present this slide because usually when you have land, you have soil, but I think it's the time to think land and water. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Oscar, for this brilliant, superb, I would say, talk, thought-provoking, and I'm sure there will be many questions. We have lots of time. So, who wants to be the first? Here. Who has the microphones? If not, maybe I can... No, this is... Así.
No lo sé, pero yo creo que está ahí atado.
No, pero no se estira. No. Who has the microphone? Okay. Here.
Thanks. I enjoy a lot this talk. And only two things. I'm following Margaret's thoughts. No, how you will put not only the variability, but how this variability in terms of frequency of energy in relation with lifetime of the organisms they are playing on, and secondly, the limit of the connectivity to be possible a system work, no matter what kind of system.
This is actually is a really nice question, and we are trying to understand it how environmental variability defines demography strategies between species, life history traits, how that feedback into community dynamics. So how being an R or a K species feedback to which kind of interactions you may have in the community. And the classic idea was that, okay, I have the environment, which defines the life history traits, and actually that defines the community that you may have in terms of species interactions. But what theory says and what the structural stability framework says is like, no, if you want to have a stable system, then your interaction should be done in such a way that should create a stability. If not, you are excluded for the system. For instance, you have an annual plant community, and to make the basic example, you have a desert where it rains most of the year, it doesn't rain at all, and then you have some years that it rains, and this is when the species can grow. And actually, when the species grow, to don't destabilize the system, because there are going to be very good species and very bad species, the interaction should be done in such a way that the good ones are not having such benefit, and the bad ones are not losing so much. And the basic idea that Jason said long years ago was that when you are very good, you are experiencing a lot of intraspecific competition, which actually is going to lower your fitness. So what I'm trying to say in general terms is that we don't know yet a bit how combination of environmental variability feedback to life history traits and how this feedback to species interactions. But the key point is that we should not think in a unidirectional way. We should think in both directional ways, because the community interactions is going to influence the life history traits of the species.
So I very much enjoyed it, but I still am a bit puzzled. Is it all in the equilibrium situation that this works? And if you would have disturbance, it would probably even increase the number of species or the complexity you could have.
Well, the structural stability or the idea that how all species coexist together take into account perturbations. It's a good question. I don't know how to give a straightforward answer. So you have like small perturbations in terms of random deaths and random births that the structural stability framework and this view understanding the structural stability system works. But also you have fire events, you have strong droughts or things like that that stabilize the system not because the system is able to accommodate some small perturbation, because create new niche opportunities for species to create new ways of interactions. So in general terms, let's say that you have two levels of perturbation that influence the coexistence of the system through different processes. And one is small perturbations that go through demography, and this is a pure stochastic effect. And then you have the more deterministic effect, that is how this variability, whatever is the variability, influence the opportunities of the species to find its own niche.
Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar, for very nice, and I like it very much, the last picture in which you try to make a synthesis, because that reflected some of my points about this. And one was the effect of the environmental variability. Now the last question was about that. The second is the legacy, that when you introduce the sentence of Ramon Margalef, is explicit in the sense that how the structure of a community is influencing the next one. That's important. And the third one that I think is maybe the most lost concept of idea in community ecology, at least in terrestrial, is the energy fluxes. The energy fluxes that are very related to the resources acquisition, because that has a cost. And I think this is a point that needs to be included more explicitly in these theoretical frames. There is some effort to introduce how these networks, how this community structure change or accommodate to different productivity in a very simple way to afford this energy. But I think it's more complex, because it's also important how energy fluxes change, or different species, or different combination of different feedbacks. Because at the end, I agree, this is a cybernetic system. It's not only important the relationship, but the strength of them and the feedback are created between them. That's eventually what produces the stability, or the ability to restabilize the system of the disturbance. But how the species, how the loops, how the combinations of species are modifying the energy fluxes, because at the end this is also in some way a trend to minimize the energy fluxes. I think this is very Margarian, but I like it very much, because your last picture was a very nice synthesis of this idea.
Yeah.
It's not a question, it's just to talk.
Yeah, well, I can, no, I like it. No, this is what I thought, that presenting like random ideas, or try more like not well so presented ideas I thought for years, that was done in the last month. But what I wanted to say basically is that you have some environmental variability, and what we did in the past was correlate that with population growth rates and with dynamics, and also with how the interactions change between species. But actually I think we can do much better than that. And that goes through thermodynamics, that goes through how species use the energy, and how this energy increases the entropy. I don't know if you know what's the entropy, but basically the entropy is the energy in a system that cannot be used for doing work. So if you go to a coral reef, that will be the structure of the coral reef. If you go to a forest, that will be the amount of wood in the trees. That is there, that the system have it, but it's not going to use it because it's structural. I mean, the tree is not going to turn to an annual plant to use the energy for whatever the reason. It's going to be a tree still. So, and I have to say, the physics have been done, basic laws, and have been thought a much more clear thinking than us. And this is, well, we know we are a bit messy. But with these laws that we have in thermodynamics, actually we can understand all these fluxes. I mean, I'm a terrestrial guy, but I love the marine and freshwater environments. And what I see in the freshwater and marine environments is that they have a much more developed view about how fluxes feed the system. And we terrestrials, we don't. Actually, we don't. We have no clue. But we can do the combination of terrestrial and marine environments through thermodynamics. And we terrestrials, we know this. We know the network of species interactions. Marine, you guys don't. I'm sorry. Or you know, but not as well as we do. And actually, we can combine both by using thermodynamics.
So this is what you are going to do in Cadiz?
Well, I'm on a few other things, yes. Yep.
First of all, many thanks for this talk. It was really very inspiring. And well, I am a behavioral ecologist, so when I see this kind of papers or talks about communities, my mind always goes to the behavior of this species involved, and particularly with insects, which is my mainstream group. And we are accumulating a lot of evidence of the diversity of behaviors those animals have, no? Especially on this example you presented on a pollinator plant network.
Yep.
So perhaps one of the things I always think is how will change your conclusions if you include on your models the ability of pollinators to learn. They learn a lot of things. The variability of behavior between individuals of the same species, or simply the presence of a dragonfly around, which is eating pollinators, and they know that. So when you include these kind of things, I think the possibility to integrate this is very difficult. I know that will be not easy. But do you think you will came to different conclusions about species coexistence when you don't think of each one as a simple element, but an element which is made of a variable number of individuals with very different behaviors, with very different abilities to learn and to change over time, which is the thing I always lack in this kind of...
Yeah, well, as I said, thank you. It was a very, very interesting question. The topic about interspecific variability, because what you are saying is basically interspecific variability, all the individuals within a population don't behave in the same way, can be incorporated into these models in two different ways. If you want to understand also the coexistence, because you want to understand how this feedback that you are saying in behavior changes the whole system, you actually need to put the dragonflies into here. You actually need to put another layer, which are dragonflies, and go feedback these things. Another way that you can do that is actually saying, well, I said environmental variability, but it can be said also as biotic variability. And that is going to, okay, if I have this community, if I have a population of dragonflies around, what is going to change is going to change all these things. And also it's going to change here. So that will be the two ways to incorporate what you are saying. Yes, if you don't want to focus on the coexistence also, if you want to focus in the coexistence of dragonfly, put it here. And if you don't want to focus, treat it as an independent factor that goes outside the system, but is influencing the system directly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. No.
Sí.
Sorry for that.
Thank you. Thank you for your very nice talk, very inspiring. I was just wondering, how do you calculate fitness and fitness differences among species pairs?
Thank you for your question. I'm very happy that you asked it, because I know that here are pure ecologists and also evolutionary biologists, and the term fitness is a complicated one. But basically, it was a bad name, I had to say. People said, or Peter Chesson defined it as average fitness differences, but it's not the fitness differences we see in not evolutionary terms. We see it in ecological terms, in terms of the effect in population dynamics. And the fitness of a population and a species has two components. One is the intrinsic capacity to produce offspring. It's like, okay, I have an R or a K strategy, and the number of eggs or the number of seeds I produce per year is X. But the other important component that people don't usually measure is how this innate ability to produce seeds changes with your neighbor. In such a sense that you are going to be a good competitor, and therefore you're going to have a high fitness if you have low sensitivity to your neighbors. So regardless if I'm alone here, regardless if I'm with 100 people, my speech is going to be the same. My seed production is going to be the same. So you have these two components, the innate ability to produce offspring and the sensitivity to change this offspring when you have a certain neighborhood. Yeah. Raúl tiene una aquí. Over there.
Sí, sí. Thank you for your talk. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you.
The first slide you showed is with the interaction between the two species and then an arrow, you know, going back to the same species. I guess that means interactions within species, not the interactions between species, but...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, maybe it's a long path to go back to the first slide, but sorry about this. The question is about linking this, exactly, linking this to population dynamics that you showed at the end. You don't need to go back to the end, but, the point is that many of the interactions between species can occur within species, including interferent competition, any sort of competition, even mutualisms is in social species, they share information. This is a way of mutualism.
Yeah, yeah.
Are we at risk of focusing very much on interaction and on the, you know, the density dependence within species in the you know, the path to linking interactions with population dynamics? You have these two, you focus on interactions, but then we less apart a bit the interactions within species, the density dependence within species.
Well, if I understood correctly, okay, I'm going to go. If I understood correctly, you are saying that this is not incorporated when I've been presenting the rest of the talk?
Well, I'm saying that we risk to forget this arrow instead of the arrows in the middle. Yeah.
Yeah, this is what I was trying to say, that we tend to forget this arrow, but in the whole dynamics I presented, this arrow is always included. Because without this arrow, okay, without this arrow, you don't have this, the interest. And with that, you don't have the niche differences. And without the niche differences, you don't have the indirect effects, you don't have the networks themselves. So when I go, okay, when I go to the most complex things, when I start to go into these things, and I present here, I mean, I did not present them, but every single species here, everyone has an arrow within. It's always included. It's the basis. It's the basis. Okay.
Oscar. Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. I really loved it. So my question is, you've talked about many mechanisms of coexistence, but how do you accommodate the neutral theory and stochasticity with all these mechanisms and the relative importance of stochasticity and these mechanisms across different environments?
Okay, neutral theory, okay. Yeah, please, my voice is killing me. So, how can I present that? Neutral theory. Neutral theory is basically, I'm going to present in a two-species framework, which is the easiest. Okay, here. Neutral theory is basically this line. Neutral theory is when you have no niche differentiation. That was solved actually this paper talk about the neutral theory. And actually is when you don't have the demographic signature of niche differences. And then you have a flat line. There's no niche differentiation. There is no density-dependent effect. But at the same time, neutral theory says at the same time that there is no competitive imbalance between species, that this is the difference. It's like the dash and the solid line will be just the same. Okay? So this is a way to solve neutral theory and to incorporate neutral theory into population, into this framework. And actually, sorry, you're going to remember my talk forever. And actually, neutral theory will be if you see the niche differences in the different framework, neutral theory will be if all the points are here. No niche differences, but no fitness difference at all. Okay? So that's a way to incorporate neutral theory into what we are saying. The other way that you were saying that stochasticity of population dynamics, okay, I give you that is kind of neutral theory, although I don't agree. And the structural stability framework, I'm not going to go to the slide, incorporates this one, because by definition, it searches for in technical terms, it searches for the parameter space that allows some deformation of the difference between species, allow some stochasticity in the fitness of the species, and still maintains all the species at the same time. So by these two means, if the points are here, and by the structural stability, we can incorporate neutral theory plus demographic stochasticity. Okay, thank you very much.
We have squeezed him. Okay, it's time to introduce the second speaker of this morning.
Agua hay allí, hay otra botella.
Crec que sí, no? Que vaig obrir la xerrada, no?
Ah, claro, claro.
Jordi, me gustaría dejarte aquí el
Fantástico,
puntero.
muy amable, ¿eh? Molt bé, quanta gent.
Ok, sí, està a tope, has hecho un pleno.
Sí, bueno, ho has fet l'Òscar, I vosaltres, també.
Okay. Have a seat, please. There are some empty seats here. Okay, I brought my notes because I don't want to forget anything of all what I have to say. Okay, it's a real honor for me to introduce the next speaker, Jordi Basconte, because he's a scientist that I admire very much. So I thank Paco for inviting me to introduce him. Okay, Jordi studied at this university, at this faculty. He got his degree in 1991, and also he got his PhD in biology at University of Barcelona in 1994, supervised by the well-known physicist Ricard Soler. Like Oscar, he also moved after that to California, and he stayed also 4 years, like Oscar, and at the same universities, but in the opposite order. He first was at Irvine, and then 2 more years at Santa Barbara. He came back in 2000, the year 2000. He was captured by the Spanish Research Council, CSIC, where he has been 15 years. In 2015, the CSIC let him go, so it was very unfortunate for Spanish science. But I hope he may come back eventually. The important thing is that he's still doing very good science and he's nearby, so that's the most important, and he's happy in Zurich. He's now a professor of ecology at the University of Zurich, and he's directing the Master on Environmental Sciences.